series of high-definition images were taken that make it possible to examine dozens of books in microscopic detail. Matthew Hood is a chartered engineer who has been assisting the project since 2008 to interpret and assess the technical aspects of the metal books. He has studied all the available photos and found them quite useful for evaluating the actual artifacts.
In particular, with these photographs, you can blow them up and see more detail. So these ones are whole page shots, but you can equally blow up a single ring to something this size, and you can go further than that in some cases, where you can take a single letter from the cover of one from here and fill an entire screen size to see the level of detail that is down to hundredths of a millimetre. So they are very useful in the absence of the real artifacts.
After 6 years of close examination, Hood has detected numerous signs of antiquity. If, as skeptics claim, the lead books are modern fakes produced by Jordanian factories, then one might expect to see signs of modern tool marks.
If your objective is to make multiple copies and sell them for money, you want to minimise the amount of effort that you've put into it, so you want to be as efficient as possible, so you would take shortcuts. So people have used modern technology to get them made on the cheap.
But close inspection of the photos reveals no trace of modern tool marks whatsoever.
I first of all looked for machine markings, whether there were signs of bypass shears cutting the metal down the edges, whether there were drill marks or machine rotating tool marks, and over time I haven't seen any of those. The edges are not straight and don't look as if they've been cut with a ruler or a pair of shears. They look like they've been cut with a knife.
A key indicator of the age and authenticity of any artifact is its patina, the thin layer that forms on the surface of metals acquired through time and weathering. The thicker, more complex and more diverse the patinas, the older the object. An overview of the surface of the lead books shows a remarkable variety of patinas.
The patina is extremely complex. You've got multiple types of patina. You've got corrosion, you've got accretion of minerals and soil, you've got items that are buried deep inside the holes even, which you wouldn't expect to see on a modern piece of lead. It tells us that these objects weren't created, yesterday and then painted with a paint or a colouring to make them brown and grey and white.
3 types of patina can be detected on the lead books, all key indicators of their age. Concretion is an encrustation on the surface due to the metal interacting with air or water over time. In layman's term, corrosion.
This one shows us a huge amount of concretion and limescale around the book, which has been cleaned off the middle section to show the design, but it's tightly adhered around these rings, and despite quite aggressive cleaning, you've got a wide range of colours of different corrosion products, with presence possibly of iron and copper, as well as lead oxides of different colours, of greys and reds and browns.
Accretion is a build-up and hardening of dirt, soil or water on the surface.
This one has mainly accretions on it. It's got lots of build-up of different coloured sandy, minerally calcified substances to the extent that you can barely see the pattern on it. And in some cases, when you zoom right in to the size of one of these rings, you're seeing an accretion of limescale that looks like the sort of stuff you see from stalagmites and stalactites, which has resulted from water dripping over a long period of time onto the surface and then evaporating to leave the minerals behind. Stalagmites and stalactites take tens of thousands of years per few inches, so that is certainly multiple centuries and possibly millennia, more than 1,000 years.
This makes it highly unlikely that the lead books are a pre-modern hoax, like the infamous 19th century Moses Shapiro Moabite clay forgeries. Not only is the epigraphy of the lead books markedly different from that of the Shapiro forgeries, but the material is very different as well. If not ancient, the lead book's corrosion and patina would seem more congruent with at least a medieval origin, say around the 1200s, when, as we know from Nachmanides, Jews had recently rediscovered ancient Jewish war coins with Paleo-Hebrew inscriptions on them. At the same time, Kabbalah was flourishing in Europe. However, when the evidence of their corrosion and patina is combined with a known chemical composition of the lead, which matches that of ancient Roman or Mediterranean lead, then it is unwise to exclude an ancient origin for at least some of the artifacts. It is arguably possible that some of the lead books may date from a later medieval period when their tradition could have been revived, for instance, but this would have to be established by relevant evidence. Another sign of aging is a type of patina also observed in the lead books: crystallization. As the smelted lead cools down from a liquid into a solid, the atoms bond together to form shapes called crystals. These are not normally visible to the human eye. However, over time it is possible to see the crystalline structure of lead. This is the case with many of the lead books.
What's happening over time is that the impurities in the metal matrix, the actual molecular structure of the metal, get expelled at the boundaries of the crystal and then come out in the form of corrosion, and these metal crystals have corroded around the edge of the grain to the extent that this one has actually fallen out. That crystal, that's a crystal hole, that's not a drilled or a made hole. The crystal of lead that was in there has fallen out of that object. I think that has happened over a very, very long period of time. And what we see across the collection is quite a wide range of different levels of purity of the metal itself.
Another sign of authenticity is the lead's hardness. The older the object, the harder the lead. Modern lead, for example, is soft and pliable and resistant to cracking.
Here is a bit of modern roof lead that I have rolled down to about 1 millimetre, and you can see that it's extremely flexible. You can bend it into shape, it's very soft.
Old lead, on the other hand, easily cracks when it is bent.
Right, here I have a piece of Roman lead from a site down in Dorset, and I will bend it and see that if it cracks across the metal. Okay. it's cracked. You can see if I bend it back, it just breaks away. This would lead me to think that if you bent one of these leaves of the book, it would crack straight away rather than bending.
Hardness is a sign of age. Age hardening occurs where the impurities and oxides gather at the boundaries of the grains and prevent free movement of the metal, so it makes it generally harder. This piece of modern lead is very soft, so you can mark it just with your fingernail lightly, very lightly. You can produce a significant dent. This piece here is Roman and has a thick, hard skin on it which goes through about a third from each side, and that is unmarked by your fingernail. This is from 1691 and has no mark from your fingernail. Pushing my fingernail in with the same effect as here doesn't mark it at all. So this is harder compared to this piece of metal of the same thickness which won't even support its own weight. And in order to harden that, you just have to wait a long time.
Cracking occurs as a result of contraction and expansion caused by changes in temperature. It is another sign of aging, as it only occurs in old, hardened lead. The multiple cracks, holes and fractures visible on the lead books is compelling evidence that they are old.
On this one we have cracking of the metal in the centre, such as this one here where it's the centre of the page, where as it's got hot and cold during its life. And you can see evidence of the cracks in here where this has occurred.
Creeping occurs when a metal loses its shape as a result of exposure to stresses such as heat, cold, and weight over very long periods of time.
Lead creeping is where over time it would sag under its own weight. So over time it would literally do that. This is an extreme example, but you can see evidence of that where the binding rings were under tension and have stretched. And some of them appear almost to have been standing on their ends over time and have changed shape with the bottoms crumpling. So it's a slow, gradual process.
If the lead books are modern forgeries, then one would expect the holes and wire for the bindings to have been made with modern tools. But they're not.
The punch holes are generally pushed through from one side after the leaves of the book have been placed together, and they are not perfectly round. And they are pushed through when the metal was soft. That metal has hardened up now, so it's certainly not been done with a modern hole punch. So that suggests that it's been hand punched
The wire shows no sign of having been made in modern times either.
They're uneven in shape and size and scale. They have different shapes, so they are hand hammered rather than being drawn through a round die. And you can see the cross section of the wire here, which is not at all round. And you can see that each of them has a different shape at different parts along its length. It doesn't look like modern machine drawn circular wire, which if you had bought in a batch of wire, that's what you would have. Lead isn't very good for wire, so it's difficult to buy lead wire. Definitely handmade.
Dr. Peter Toneman, professor of classics at Oxford University, claimed that the lead books could easily have been created by a factory of forgeries in Jordan. But the complex range of surface effects, patinas, cracks, crystallization, hardness and other signs of aging, makes the ideal barely credible. To begin with, any attempt to use chemicals would have destroyed the highly complex variety of patinas.
Had that patina been applied with paint or chemicals, we would have detected that in some of the tests that have been done. If you had tried to soak some of these objects in various of those acidic chemicals or fluids, they would have stripped away some of the calcification. You couldn't have done it because there are so many different layers of detail of different materials on here that would have been stripped away by aging chemicals.
A modern workshop would also have had to store the fakes in a bewildering mix of atmospheric conditions.
You'd have to be replicating the storage conditions of things that have been wrapped in cloth, sealed in lead boxes, protected from the air. Some that had water flowing over them, so you've got to replicate the sort of tide marks that we see on some of these objects. Replicate how the impurities in the metal have come out in crystalline form, so you can see the crystals of the metal, so you have to try and replicate all of that. None of these are regular features. It's not just like replicating a man-made pattern again and again and again, which is what you would normally see with forgery, where you're forging a piece of art, you're copying what somebody else has already done. This is not the work of the human hand that you're copying. It's the complex interaction of metallurgy, chemistry, all sorts of other factors that go to cause coloration, the surface, the other features that we see on these objects.
The sheer range of cracks and corrosion would have had to be individually and meticulously reproduced.
I think it would be extremely difficult because you'd have to first of all create the metal with the designs. You'd have to then create and recreate the cracks. You'd have to create the corrosion of the metal, the interaction between the two metals of the lead ring and the lead book. You'd have to then recreate the multiple layers of different coloured materials around here, and you can see that the level of detail is quite astonishing. Bearing in mind that that ring is about 6 to 7 millimeters across, you're going to have to be working down at the thousandths of millimeters level to be recreating all of those.
And all that for a single page of just one lead book. There are dozens of books, each with several pages.
You've got to do that on multiple objects which exhibit a very wide range of different features and patinations, and some of them show evidence that they've been wrapped in a fabric, and that would exclude the oxygen and therefore reduce the speed at which patination occurs. And across the collection we have 50 to 70 books, each of which has got multiple pages.
Similar attention to detail would have had to be paid to the binding holes.
You'd have to be recreating the different little pits and rust patches on here, the cracks, the accretions deep inside the binding holes. So there's such a wide variety of different features. It would need such a wide range of expertise.
You'd be talking about a major university research unit with the relevant expertise brought together, and I personally don't think that's how they originated.
The sheer complexity, time, effort and cost involved in faking dozens of lead books makes it unlikely that any workshop would bother. Especially when the lead books are not copies of any antiquities that are either known or sought after.
If this was a modern object being made to look old, we are left with a mystery. Why does anybody go to such trouble to create an extremely convincing ancient artifact with apparently no point to it? There is no meaningful text on these. If these things are created in the 20th century, for what purpose? To sell to somebody as an ancient? I wouldn't pay much for something that doesn't say anything, doesn't tell me what it is, doesn't indicate its old date. I'm not going to take somebody's word for it that, oh, this happens to be old, so you buy it because it's old. This leaves me with a genuine curiosity about what these things are. But I do not think that it is possible simply to shrug your shoulders and say, modern forgery. That is a totally incoherent thesis. It makes absolutely no sense. The proper response is to try to minimize our ignorance rather than parade it.
We've had a lot of rather silly judgments made by people who really should have known better, to be honest. Colleagues that I think will probably regret that they were so silly. But unfortunately, in this age of mass media, when you're silly, you're not silly on your own. Everybody knows. Those of us who've been examining them closely for many years now realise the huge amount of knowledge that is necessary just to begin the process. And for people just to read a couple of blogs and say, oh, absolute rubbish, and then find it confirmed in the tabloid press, well, scholarship really can't deal with that.
If you blog, then you need to convince people that you know what you're talking about. There's also a rule running right in the back of my head, which is that the less you know about something, the more convinced you are. Bloggers have their own agenda. Bloggers blog. They want to be popular. They want to convince other people of their opinions. They want to pretend they know something. They're on a little ego trip, no doubt. That's fine. And some people might take them seriously. I don't.
What I am critical of is the fact that they have not seen or handled the material. They are basing their judgment on third-hand information. And you cannot do that. I would hesitate to claim something as a forgery or genuine without actually having done studies on it. And these people who are blogging have never actually handled the material. They are looking at other people's work, which in itself may be suspect. So it's double suspect. So you really can't take them terribly seriously.
There's a lot of glaring errors. Professor Toneman not recognizing a But there's at least one of the alphas on the crocodile tablet that has a crossbar. And also not being aware of the elementary fact that alphas with and without crossbars together is perfectly normal. And then Caruso's argument about a non-existent Hebrew letter that exists on Hebrew coins, and the stamps and molds proving modern fakery. These are all glaring errors.
The rash of skepticism which assaulted the announcement of the find has revealed in certain scholars a surprisingly unscholarly attitude. But behind the scenes, amidst the leading experts in the field, the discovery has stimulated a genuine scholarly curiosity.
There is certainly something here that's worth investigating, and that some of them are very old indeed. I think it was nearly 40 of my colleagues signed that letter to the Times a few years ago, urging the government of Jordan to make these things available for scholarly study. I mean, these were all people who were at a specialist conference for Old Testament studies. Many of them were really senior scholars, you know, presidents of the society and so forth.
I think whatever suspicions one might have, and I certainly have a lot, I think, temperamentally a suspicious person. I think the proper answer is to basically having an open mind and not being convinced in advance. There may be one thing or the other, and seeing whether there's any way we can get closer to establishing what they really are. I don't see why anybody who wanted to call themselves a scholar would want to do anything else.